Wow, it's noisy.
Yes, Siri.
Yeah, right.
You don't do make it free as I can get. This is a lot more, isn't it?
There is one more after this, actually.
Well, how can that be?
I know, this is one of the things I asked Marvin about early on, and we just said, oh, we'll see how it goes. But now we're at this point where we have to decide. So we'll talk this week if we want to do week 6.
Well, it's next week, it's Monday. Thursdays.
Right. So Wednesday, Thursday. I mean, I have no problem.
Good Friday.
There are people that would say, that's too much, John. Want to start talking or discussing now? We can. Our opening question, while I wait, I'm going to wait a couple more minutes to see if anybody else will do it. Can you think of a time when you had a change in behavior or you had to get into a new habit? You knew something had to change in your life. You had to change either your rhythms or, bad habits have to go away, things like that. Think of a time when you had to do that, share that with someone, and then you have multiples to choose from. Think of a time when someone told you you had to change versus you decided you had to change. Which one was easier? Why?
Let the circle be unbroken.
I'll come over there in a second.
Three-way discussion, you, myself, and I, just, thinking to myself the other day, so. No, those aren't, it's not great.
It was came to mind for me was to stop smoking. Terrible little habit.
Right. I did in graduate school too.
And it's not an easy thing to give up. And when it was on my terms, I actually did much better than what the doctor said.
Right.
Get your stuff together.
Is it voluntary choosing or is this an involuntary choosing?
Well, that's it. Is it what makes a voluntary choosing easier, I guess?
It's easier when you decide yourself rather than being told.
I feel like if you know the purpose behind it, it helps too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I had to say I didn't smoke very much. But it just left me the way.
Doesn't take much.
Yeah, I started to read.
Oh, here, wait a minute. One key?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. I just locked it. No.
Friendly of you.
Yeah, well, yeah. And
And the one I realized when you go. Hey. And then the other one is when.
Especially when you don't agree with it or something, right? Like.
This is not a good idea.
I'll be here when it's still wrong. Fix it back to what it was. Okay. The
Well, I
was.
say this stopped going with my Christmas during the 60s. Because I used to work in retail.
Right.
Christmas, you just didn't feel like Christmas when you were on peace.
Oh, of course not. And when you've been had Christmas music in your ears, it's like,
Right, absolutely. And so I said, Christmas. This is what I'm supposed to do. A special day for you on your birthday.
Oh, it's great.
And January 6th, I said, okay, January 6th is it. 2000.
Oh, that's okay.
So I was for 52 years. But it was.
And it was on your terms,
easier
though?
than I thought. I love it. 1930s cigarette days out, which one cigarette that said the truth was not still.
Really? That's fascinating.
And I said, nope. And I stopped. Started to drink tea. And then with us, tea and cigarettes to me were just coffee and tea was one thing.
Very happy. Right.
But I started drinking tea. Started to want a cigarette. So I didn't just always.
There's a flag, so the flag.
Yeah.
We associate with.
Yeah, and you have to cut out the association. That for me was a nice piece of.
So I will be sober 29 years. Yeah. I got to the point where I said, I'm either going to stop or I'm going to get in trouble. And so I quit. Quitting smoking was a lot harder. That was because that's socially acceptable to do when you're in panic.
Right.
The brown people back there can cut it. When you're standing outside the church door on Sunday morning.
Hard to be a little more silent. Outside of that.
Okay, so this was just to get our conversation started.
Is anybody listening out in soccer?
No, there's no one on yet. No, I'm joining us this week. It's like,
Well, I say.
yeah, right.
Betsy wrong.
This is a safe space. I think that's, if I remember right, Betsy actually had some little thing, she had an appointment with the refugee camp. There are a lot of them. They're cool, they're hilarious, they're just great, they're so friendly, but there are a lot of little kids in that group.
Yeah.
You mentioned little cookies today.
Yeah. There was a crowd of them kind of through me.
I'm supposed to drive someplace.
So great.
Well, they're starting to do something.
Very little, but yes, they are. So far, only one of them is still, one at the primary adult was the translator. That's how we got.
And then there is something that has been too traumatized before. I thought, oh, that's really
True. They've been here for 3 months now, though, so that hopefully, and they've had time to acclimatize. So we digress.
training for.
So we are on week 5. There is a week 6. Next week, Wednesday, is moving forward. And it's kind of taking the things that we've discussed over the last few weeks and implementing it. Now, at the end of the class, we'll have a discussion on whether they're discussing the merits of having another class on Wednesday, when you're going to likely be here, or at least see my face again on Thursday and Sunday thereafter. That's a lot of John. I understand that, so we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it later, discuss. But today, so we've been talking about poverty and seeing how God works in the world, and then joining God's work in the world is not only our responsibility, but we have the joy of joining in that work of helping people work through poverty. We'll review what poverty is again really quick, just because it's always good to review that definition in this context for this study. Talked about intent and joining God's work, and today we're talking about how we can, not only recognize what needs to happen, but how to foster it, and focusing on change is the key there. Moments of change and postures of change, being prepared to change. So that's where that conversation that we started with will go, and we'll review that question. But okay. In the context of this conversation, we have said that poverty is a broken relationship. One of 4 broken relationships generally will then lead to an imbalance. So relationship with yourself, relationship with others, your relationship with God, and relationship with the world. And as those relationships are broken because of the sinfulness of this world, if you are not on good terms with God, you're not going to be on good terms with other people, yourself, or the world. There will be an imbalance. Similarly, if one of those relationships is strained, another part of that equation will start falling out of balance. And so poverty is when one of those relationships is out of balance. We often assume that poverty is a situation where someone is lacking materially, but people can be poor spiritually, people can be poor emotionally or relationally. And so we are reminding ourselves that if one is poor physically, it does not mean that they are completely broken in other areas of life. In fact, those of us that are materially rich often have poverty in other areas. So if we recognize that, that will help us move along. And if that is our definition of poverty, then poverty alleviation is repairing those relationships. Anything we do to help people rebuild their relationships with themselves, with God, with others, and their understanding of themselves, relationship with the world, stewardship, those are all attempts at repairing broken relationships and working to alleviate poverty. Jumping a bit back into this conversation. We need to be able to change. We need to be able to see change when it needs to happen. We need to be able to foster change, which is where we are. So we talked about our own lives. Have you had an experience where you've had to change? We talked about the one I brought up and brought on a long conversation thereafter was trying to stop smoking. And knowing that, like, when the doctor told me I had to change, I stopped smoking. I was like, I don't wanna. But when it was my choice and I said, okay, no, I'm going to do this. This is on my terms. It's going to happen. Then it was a lot easier. It wasn't easy. It was easier. And that's one very strong example. But have you ever tried to get to a better behavior, tried to change your own habits? Have that go wrong? An example. Yeah, sure.
When I was younger, I didn't stand up for myself, and I had to like force myself to stand up for myself. It's a hard habit to get it to, but I'm going to do it.
That's good. And that's on your terms, right? So you recognize the importance of that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Not easy, not less though.
No.
It can be exhausting. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yes. Oh, sorry. We should do names because there are only 6 of us and no one's on recording yet. So, I'm John. I'm the associate pastor here. And I'll invite you. We'll go this way. Just get everybody's names.
I'm Richard. I'm an elder.
I'm Bill. I'm my wife's. I'm adjunct.
Yeah, you are. He's a retired minister, so he kind of counts.
Kind of.
Not really.
But you never not count. You are always helpful.
Positive affirmation.
Non-member. Unmuted, member, and work in the office. I'm Mariah from the desk.
You're Ryan?
Mariah.
Mariah, okay,
Like
sorry.
mountains level.
Oh, excellent, excellent, Mariah. Excellent. Welcome, 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 welcome. We are happy to have everybody here. There is fruit.
And Werther's.
And Werther's. So we're talking about all this. Oh, another thing we talked about a couple weeks ago was the phases of life when we are entering into a relationship with someone to help them rebuild their relationship, to help them alleviate their poverty. People are often in one of three places. They are either at that point where they hit that crisis and they are on their downward spiral, if you will. They are in need of relief. The rehabilitation phase is when they are getting help getting back to where they were. And then development is that phase that seems to, it's often the longest. It's anything that is above and beyond where people were before. Last week we were able to poke holes in the theories of this book a little bit. And I look forward to seeing you do that again. So I'm just bringing it up so that it's fresh in our minds. Okay, to help us get our brains set on where we're going on this, this is an example that they had in the book, and I kind of amended to make it shorter. It begins with a gentleman in someone's office saying, "Thanks so much, Jerry. I don't know what I would have done without you. I'm sure this will be the last time." As Tony left his office, Jerry thought, "No, it won't be the last time. We will be here again next month and again the month after that. It'll never end." Jerry put his head in his hands and thought about quitting his job again. For the past 8 years, Jerry had been serving as the mercy coordinator for his church. His church being a thriving congregation located on one of the main thoroughfares in a mid-sized American city. For years, the senior pastor had been trying to move the congregation to be a ministry that shows the love of Christ in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Jerry bought into the pastor's vision, but he was growing increasingly disillusioned. His life seemed to be an endless cycle of people like Tony, people who, for a variety of reasons, consistently struggled to pay their electric bills, consistently needed help buying their groceries, and never seemed to change. Jerry had begun to wonder if he was just enabling people like Tony and actually hurting them in the very process of trying to help them. We've got to change what we're doing, he thought. But how? Where do we begin? So, with that question,
remember, development is a process of ongoing change, of walking with people in a way that both they and you are brought into closer relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. Development is fundamentally about change. Which raises the question, how do people actually change? What does the change process look like for human beings? Well, at a most fundamental level, people cannot experience lasting change without the power of the Holy Spirit. Unless God shows up and does a miracle, folks, there cannot be lasting change. But in addition to that scriptural truth, social scientists and educators have observed some common patterns in how most people experience change.
All change tends to start out of people's direct experience. Here's my life, here's what I know, here's my history, and any new information I'm gonna get is gonna be built upon that. But typically something happens in a person's life that makes them willing to look at their life and say, maybe I want life to be different than it is today. And there seems to be three basic triggers to change. One is a crisis. Something unexpected happens to me that just upsets my world. And all of a sudden I want to rethink my reality. My child dies unexpectedly. The hurricane comes through, and oh, do I want to stay and live in New Orleans or not? I mean, it really causes you to say, man, maybe I need to reevaluate my life. A second trigger for change is this idea of a burden getting to the point where it can't be endured any longer. It's like, I just can't take it any longer. It's that woman in Guatemala who's lost her third child to malnutrition who says, no more, this is never happening again. I'm ready to see something different. It's that guy who just constantly has the electricity shut off and constantly can't pay their bills and goes from job to job to job. And finally comes to a point of saying, this is not the way to live life. That's a trigger for change. And the third trigger for change is just simply seeing a different possibility, a new idea, a new way of living. You know, it's that kind of role modeling from the outside. Did you ever think that you could take the income you have and stretch your dollars further? Did you realize when you took that payday loan that the interest rate you're paying on an annual percentage rate is probably around 500%? Do you realize here in rural Nicaragua that we can get water from down below up to your mountain and pump there without electricity? Those are all just new ideas, a new way of seeing or doing something that can trigger people to say, wow, maybe my life can be different. So these triggers bring people to a point where they're willing to look at their lives and reflect upon what's been and what could be. And then the next step or the next stage of the change process is to act on that decision, to go implement it. And out of that, you're going to see what worked, what helped, what didn't help, and now your life situation is different. When we say that development is an empowering process, this is the process we're talking about. This process of looking at your life, some trigger causing you to be ready to do that, reflect on your reality, make decisions for a better future, acting on it. That's what it means to be empowered. That's what we mean by the empowering process.
If you ask a person what do they have, to me, you've already told that person that you are somebody. Because you got something. That's what you said. You just have a door wide open for that person to think. You know, instead of asking that person, what can I do for you? You know, those questions is like night and day.
Freddie Weaver grew up in a small town in East Florida and spent over 30 years of his adult life on the streets controlled by his substance abuse. That is, until he found his circle of support. A local organization full of people committed to helping him discover his God-given abilities, potential, and dreams. With ongoing training classes, encouragement, and discipleship, Freddie put feet to the hopes he had always longed for, building his own business.
This is like my little office. This is my office back here. And this is where I keep my yards at. This is my scheduling. Like today's Thursday, I only had like 2 yards. But I had like 14 yards that was overdue. So I'm squeezing them in my schedule some kind of way. You know, sometimes people can see in you what you don't see in yourself because you're so depressed. You're feeling so bad. And you're thinking one way, you're always thinking down or not really positive the way you should be thinking. But then if somebody can spot something in you that you just don't see in yourself. If somebody was willing to see something in me that I probably didn't see in myself. And that's why I'm where I'm at, and I know that is.
And so I love the model, the idea that people from different communities are coming together and that you're trying to help not only this person improve their own standing, but you're putting yourself in a situation where I'm humble and open enough to learn about your world as I'm walking alongside of you.
I think if you learn to listen to a person's need, you can help them. But if you're not listening to that person, you're not going to know how to help them. If you ask a person the right question, it's going to open a big door for them to think more of themselves than less than themselves. Yeah, it's a big difference.
One of the primary features of poverty is lack of access to social networks. We underappreciate this because we have access to networks. Think about how you got your job. Almost everybody gets a job because they know somebody who's already working at the place. That's how I got my job. What if you're socially isolated, you don't know somebody? Think about trying to go and get a bank loan. If you know the banker or the loan officer, it goes a little better, doesn't it? One of the primary things that teams of mentors do is not just address the brokenness at the individual level. They can start to address the systemic brokenness by providing access for materially poor people to the institutions and systems that are healthy for human flourishing. Now, as you look at your church, there's a number of things you're looking for, but the thing that's going to be in shortest supply and the thing that you need the most to help that lady with her electric bill are teams of supportive people to walk with that woman across time. If poverty is rooted in broken relationships, you're not going to solve the problem by giving that woman money. You're going to solve the problem by walking with her in highly relational, empowering ways that help her discover her gifts and to develop those gifts so that she doesn't need to come back and ask for help with her electric bill over and over and over again. The problem is that what our churches don't have are groups of people willing to do this. Most of our poverty alleviation strategies and funding sources are funding a material approach to poverty alleviation when what we need is a relational approach to poverty alleviation. That's the problem. This is a hard message, but it's true. Development is a process of change, and so it can only occur with people who are willing to change. If a person is not willing to change, you can't change that in them. You can pray for them, but at the end of the day, if a person is not interested in change, you can't make that happen for them. There's often a continuum that's used to describe the range of people and their openness to change. So on the very left end of the spectrum are those who see no problem. They don't see anything wrong. Well, it's pretty hard to affect change in people's lives if they don't actually think there's anything wrong at all with their life. A little bit further up from them are those who recognize that there's something wrong, but they don't really believe it's their responsibility to pursue change. They're looking for somebody else to change. They don't think that they need to. Now, I want to be careful here. It is often the case that people are in the situation they're in because of their own behaviors, because of choices that they've made. But it's not always the case. Remember, the systems are broken too. But regardless of how one has ended up in the situation, stewardship of resources, stewardship of gifts requires people to take whatever efforts they can to affect positive change in their lives. A little further up are those who are open to change, but they're fearful that what you're suggesting might not work well. They're fearful that your idea might not actually help them. You have to listen very carefully to those people because they might actually know something about their situation that you don't understand. They may actually understand why what you are suggesting is dangerous for them, why it's risky for them, and why it might not work for them. They might actually know something.
If I didn't accept the help, I don't think it was nothing nobody could do for me. I think that deep inside I had to want this change. I had to want this. Yes, it's good to have somebody to kind of guide you along. You gotta want it from within. That's my belief. I think the only reason that I'm sober is partly to do with a lot of people helping me, but it's mainly to do with I wanted this.
Is it good stewardship of our time and resources to spend it on people who themselves aren't really at a stage where they want to change? Is that part of what we need to think about when we think about helping poor people? Measure receptivity and work with people who are open to it, have some issues, but that you can work with to help them move forward to bring change in their lives.
So if we think back to our examples of things that had to change, what triggered those changes? A decision? Was there something that triggered those decisions? Every situation is going to be different, by the way, but sense that something wasn't working right. Yeah, I agree with that. For me too. My example, mine, who the doctor told me to, that was one thing, but for me to decide, I had to see that there were things going wrong.
And the best part, the interest, that there's a better way.
Yes.
It's one thing to get away from something bad, but it's much more practical to know something.
I do this every week, so I might as well keep going. I'm going to latch on to the first conversation we started with. So smoking again. The after not smoking, you can see the health changes. So you can slow down and also see those health changes. So that being the driving mover as well. Continuing to stick to that decision. Seriously, why do I keep using those examples? The extreme examples, but hey, it works. Have you ever attempted a change and failed? What was different about the successful time from the failures? Or different times where
To tell you, the me tended to be when maybe it was a good idea to change. Get a little affirmation from people around you, but no positive reinforcement.
right,
You know,
either external or internal.
right.
Yeah.
It's too easy. It's just too easy to.
Others, yeah, that can also be a huge part of it. Sure. So some people are just stubborn. Yeah.
None of us are that.
No.
I was using, I was thinking of this.
What did I do today that made Nancy sleep? We did. It's funny how like stubborn is the default for people. It's the easy thing to do, isn't it? It's the easiest choice to be stubborn, to stick with what we know, to admit that we're stubborn is one thing. To admit that we're wrong is one.
You're never stubborn. You're firm in your conviction.
That sounds like a theologian, right?
Yes.
That's someone who's gone to grad school or something. So in the film, one of the authors of the book said there are 3 types of triggers. There's that introduction of a new way of seeing things, something with promise, and saying, oh, there's a potential beyond if I change what I'm doing. The second one is when the status quo is just unbearable. And then the third being, or in the video is the first, a crisis. Something happens and you have no choice, but something has to change. You can't live in a house if the house is washed away, right? So looking at those, so now taking a shift, we're going to be thinking about people that we know in our community that are in need. Thinking about people in our community that are in need. What are some examples, conceivably, we may not know, but we can conceive of examples of triggers for our neighbors. Triggers of crises, or triggers that would prompt them to be prepared to make a change.
Somebody else recognize places. Somebody saw it's a relationship.
Right.
And then, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. That plants the seed for change. Now somebody you see something in yourself that you didn't see.
Did that gentleman talk about having a moment? If he did, I was writing notes, I lost it, I didn't catch it. But did he mention a trigger point for when he changed from being on the street to running his own business?
Yeah, somebody said something.
Was it something it was that one word? Okay. So it was probably the big one, the quality of life, the opportunity to change. And for him, he probably had to have someone that he trusted tell him. And that was probably that's the time.
That's the problem. I'm reading. Oh, you found the research about it's really hard to a lot of pulse, right? Oh, well, but sometimes there are a lot of examples in that book, and it often took 2 years, 2 to 3 years, just not possible. I said, oh, this kid, trust, and then one time here in church, but it took 2 years to build that relationship, trust, because they see church vision as bad things. That's hard.
We do have history, the church. A terrible history. We have a long history of good things too.
One thing I did miss in that video, one, they talked about how we seen the need and could get it moving, but they never touched on what triggered, because the problem with substance addiction, 3 decades on the street. They never touched on what that was. What, yeah. Once they got past that, then you can see, but.
I'm trying to, I'm replaying that conversation in my head video, trying to remember if there's something. And there was someone who said something after building a relationship with her, saying, you know what do you want to do? But it could have been also 30 years in the streets, a long time. That status quo was finally wearing on.
Yeah. It wasn't clear in terms of what but yeah.
It only takes a lot of money to start a long care. This is also something to do with the proportion or some supplements or something. And law courts, these big writing models, it was $50,000.
But it's like riding in a Cadillac, those things.
Yeah.
I tried to do what they say.
It's so dangerous.
It's very good, but
Well, no one's willing to drive a tractor and steer it by brake pedals on nothing like wheels. That'll get you the first time you.
okay.
That's one of those. Yeah.
But, going back to that home care business, I mean, somebody had to fund him, shall we say, or get a loan to buy the first lawnmower, shall we say. So, as we say, there was a lot here. He just suddenly was mowing lawns after 30 years.
Correct.
But it is relationships.
I agree, absolutely. And I think we see that. for the sake of this conversation though, we talked about 30 years on the street being a trigger. If we think of other people that I think of Charlie, if he was in a position, something that would be a trigger for him could be a very cold night where the status quo living on the street is just too much. It says, I need to change. Or COVID, I mean, we can use that as an example. People medical crises being something that forces someone to really take stock of where they're at, and what's going on. Our community has domestic abuse situations. So events in those families' lives could be triggers for change. So we can think of these, we can conceive of these triggers. What ministries or what activities do we participate in? Do we support? Serve those needs and address those triggers, those trigger moments. Bless you, yeah. Are you allergic to something? Or are you allergic to God's good greenery? Because I'm not though. So it's that time of year. And if you double up on certain ones, your brain function goes down. We'll learn that in some. There are, so if a ministry that we have or a service, something that we do is something that we intentionally are saying, this is us serving people in need. If it doesn't serve someone in in that trigger moment, is it actually helpful?
Yes, because you're building a relationship over time.
If we're building a relationship,
Right.
I agree.
You know, during the years that my wife chaired the mission committee, for 3 years, basically, every fourth Thursday was Frozen Fishes. We were there. The first winter we were here, I ended up scooping pancakes for Saturday breakfast with Dick Ramsey, actually. They thought that was a joke. Get the two clergy that's cooking pancakes, you know. Yeah, all those years of school, so I could cook a pancake. I did work my way through college and seminary in the kitchen, but part of it was the fact that I've seen the same people there, you know, as I've seen everywhere, even now. Some of them for 10 years. But you do build a relationship, even if it's only occasional. You know, they know they can come and talk to you. They know that, you know, not as much as Charlie does, but you know the same people, and you actually begin to know their story. And so, if every now and then they'll talk to you, you know, about something more than just superficial.
Right. It's amazing how just a familiar face over a month or two, you can look at someone and say, "You look like you're having a rough day," and you've never had a conversation with them before. But
Yeah.
that your regular appearance shows commitment, and that can start a relationship. So I agree.
Yeah.
Some of these things that we do that, you know, are easily identified and said, you know, like that isn't going to help people in their moment of crisis. If done properly, it can. Sometimes no.
But the other thing is our day-to-day lives. You know, I spent 9 years in school career minutes. I sold auto parts in dealerships. I probably did more pastoral counseling with mechanics in the shop than I did in a small church where I preached on Sunday morning. So just because I built a relationship with these people, and they knew that they used to joke about the corporate conscience, because, well, they knew they could send me out to the body shops to do estimates, and the insurance guys couldn't bribe me. You know,
Did you wear your collar?
Once or twice I actually ended up in the shop with my collar on, whoever is mine.
Yeah.
But you know, but I think I could get away with doing that. And that's something everybody should be able to do, is to witness, in that faith and be available for the people in the crisis need, even if they're in the line of the grocery store.
It's like you're in your church, they hear that Jesus every Sunday.
Yeah.
And then it becomes so rote. But
Yeah,
the guys at the auto shop don't hear about Jesus every Sunday.
Yeah.
So it's something
No,
new.
They
I mean,
do,
have
but
questions.
it's generally one of those, oh, Jesus. comments.
It's in proclamation.
I come here every week, we always talk about the same thing.
No. I don't. Okay.
Sorry.
I have about 18 seconds.
Oh, no.
So let's get the next question. Right, so.
And so, yeah,
Excellent.
so
This
we
is a
have
good
to
part.
have
This is the
that
part that
is,
ask her on the mission committee should be here.
yeah,
Yeah.
that,
Marvin. I think we met Sunday.
Oh, this is something.
Yeah.
Somehow,
Yeah. Okay, so for the sake of conversation and so that we get something done in the last 5 minutes. What did you decide? If this church was to be used without worry for security or for staffing or money, and someone is in need in our community and they're at a triggering point in their lives where they are ready to make change or need assistance in making those changes, what could this place offer? We could do that elimination plan. Yeah, there's, I mean, churches, a couple of churches in town have done that, or some semblance of that kind of program in the last couple of years at least.
Right, and then go to the next step for all the.
We could move into advocacy.
that's right, yeah.
That's right, but that's, an advocacy work is one of those things that's, it's the justice work that's upriver, so
Oh,
to
yeah,
speak.
it's not immediate, it doesn't
No.
meet needs.
But it is incredibly important nonetheless.
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
I can
Okay,
remember-
great.
I can remember the times in the 60s.
What other ideas did y'all have?
My biggest thing was having people here that could answer needs. First thing is find out the question, what is it you want to have happen? And then having people here that can help someone plan finances. And somebody else that can get somebody from the local housing authority to be able to be here to help people find housing. They need to do that. Or that providing there is welcome to housing, whether there's housing. That's another question, but being able to have, you got a place to have people in house, if you have the finance. We have, according to your plan, we have all the volunteers to finance.
That's right.
We can staff a couple of extra rooms up there, it's not like we're out of space in the building.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, you have space. We have a shower. In the little children's wing, there is a single flush toilet. Right beside the knee-high toilet, like 2 tiny toilets.
Yeah. Well, having been to church that had a barber. Every Thursday had a barber and clothing covered, and Tuesdays was Dress for Success, and they get suits and other stuff for people. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a great idea. That whole preparing someone so that they can.
They can actually interview for a job, Yeah.
Yes. Those would be key for people, a lot of people in a lot of different situations. Really, if they're at a crisis point or a turning point or a triggering point where they're trying to leave a situation of domestic abuse, that equips them, they have their own source of income, that makes that process so much easier for them.
Mhm.
If someone is in a situation where they are homeless, that is the first step is to quickly do that person, get a job, so they can move.
So just find when you volunteer for the churches, you can hire an HR person who can help do the interview stuff.
Since we have all the volunteers.
That's right, we do. We have all the
All
volunteers.
volunteers.
We're talking
That's
about
great.
the domestic violence situation. Maybe a lawyer.
We need to have a shelter first.
You know that.
Yeah, so read tomorrow's epistle. There's good news about the shelter.
Good.
Yeah, so Voluntary Action Center signed a contract to purchase 5.6 acres of land off the business. And yeah, it's raw land, so it can be used for construction of a brand new facility. Yeah.
All right.
It is, so it's just to the east of the park. There's open land.
You know, the bowling state, the Collins state.
Well, not on the, it'll be on the north side of the.
Yeah, that's the north side. Really big. Really Rogers.
Near the,
Near the power plant, east of the power
oh, okay.
The railroad tracks go across. the
Yeah,
middle, above-
yeah.
above the-
Yeah.
Last card.
plant. I'm parachuting in late. A dentist, need a dentist.
Yes.
We were almost retired dentists on our session.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think dental care is just something that's just, that people just, that's something that people drop first. It's something like the link between bad teeth and heart disease is really pretty strongly established.
Yeah.
And that's one of those moments where someone has a toothache or they like that's a moment where people are like,
Yeah,
because it's so painful.
yeah.
And then you eat and
Yeah.
and sleeping is a problem. All of it is also. So that would definitely be a trigger point for someone to give good cheap.
So they have all these situations connecting someone with the case who might be, they have to get except when they do the whole like getting on lawyer for people connected.
It's caseworkers, social workers are so underpaid for what they know.
Yeah.
And everything they can coordinate, it's very good. Very good. Yeah, it's not a bank for social workers. Anywhere. There's some creative spending happening with all that money that was coming in over the pandemic. There's some very creative uses. Way for them to do it. So this project, this conversation isn't meant to be a solution. It's meant to identify opportunities because we don't often bring enough. And it takes some imagining. If we don't have the conversations with people often enough outside our walls, it takes some work to imagine what situations they might be in. It takes encouraging of us to have those conversations, to have those relationships, to start those conversations, so that we can be prepared when people are in a moment of crisis or at a triggering point where they're looking for help, so that we can do that, so we can be that help. And sometimes that is just a sandwich or one place to stay. That's good to see. Oh my gosh, she's not most. Okay. Let's see what else I had on here. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks, Carter. So in the video clip, he talks about the continuum of receptivity to change. and it's been kind of implied in our conversation, but anybody can be, and at a moment when they're ready to change, that means they're on one end of that scale, and when they're not ready to change, they're at the other end of that scale. It takes work and relationship. It takes time to be able to figure out when you can identify people that are ready to change and not ready to change. But the idea being, this book would push churches and push communities of faith to, instead of identifying people that need change, rather find the people that are wanting change and serve them. It takes a lot more work to go and find those people that change and to get them to understand why they didn't change. Help them, and if you are helping people change, others will see that, and they'll come to you because they see the results of that change. So that summarizes these 2, maybe even 3 slides. As those being transformed by the gospel, we believe that we are being transformed by the gospel, and we are called to be ministers of reconciliation. The church, local churches, are really the best place to encourage people to find change, right? And so it forces us to really be able to mobilize intangible gifts on behalf of materially poor, so that we might expedite the transportation of people from a very poor situation, from a situation that is absolute crisis, to be able to get them into a better place, a safer place, a healthier place. It requires us to recognize that we too are broken, and we too are in a state of poverty, clearly in a different state of poverty, but we are poor in one sense or another. And if we recognize that, it makes the process of serving with someone or walking alongside someone who's in need materially easier, and it's more fulfilling and edifying for us. Remembering that we are all broken is really important. We've talked about a lot of this in our conversation, so I'll close with this. Remember, it's not the materially poor, only the materially poor who need to change. We all need to change because we're all poor in different ways. The faster we learn how to implement transformative and empowering change in our own lives, the more effective we can be in supporting others as they learn the same. God is reworking the hearts of all as they help one another through their own forms of poverty. And so it just gives us a holistic approach to doing this work. So I'll pray for us, if that's okay. Eternal God, we stand as creatures who cannot even begin to understand the concept of eternity, and yet in your majesty, you are above and beyond even that. We stand in awe of who you are. We realize that our brokenness and our sinfulness are central to our inability to be the whole beings that you have created us to be. We see it in our own lives, in our relationships, in our interactions with the world, and in our connection with you. Give us hearts that are open to reconciliation, repair, and change. Help us to see how we can move with small steps first and with bigger ones as we continue, and slowly be reformed more and more in the likeness of Christ. Help us to see how you are calling us to change, so that we can be better prepared to help others as they continue on the similar journey of their own. Grant us humility, perseverance, and confidence to live as you call us to live. Amen. Thank you, friends. So the one question that remains, do we want to meet next week, Wednesday evening? Or do we want to do, because I can also do an alternate version where I can post something like this online. And then it could be an individual study that it's guided by video. Keeping in mind that we will be worshiping on Thursday as well, or Maundy Thursday. We have a Maundy Thursday service at 7 in person on Maundy, and then on Sunday again.
We're practicing.
So you will be here, so the bells will be here.
And will the choir be?
Yes. Want to do it? Excellent. Y'all, you're
Is this
great.
kind of a wrap-up?
Yeah, it's gonna be, if I understand right, I haven't read it yet. But my understanding of it, the overview page says it's summer. What was that, Nancy?
You haven't read it yet. We'll do that all.
It's true. I tried it before Wednesday, but we'll see. Live on the edge. That's all I've got for y'all. Thank you. If you have a book at home, we're reading number 11 next week. Chapter 11.
I just saw somebody on.
Oh,